Oh, I don't see you though. Let's see.
Hello.
There we are.
Welcome to the webinar. We are on air and waiting for a few more people to join us. And our webinar today is on modern and sustainable agriculture. My name is Meg Edelman. I'm an Annie member, a nurse. And we have Barb Sattler on the line as well. And we'll get started in just a second here. So today, we're going to go through some quick housekeeping issues like we do at the start of all of the webinars. We just want to remind people that this webinar platform works best on Chrome. If you're having any technical difficulties, best thing to do would be to close out, restart your computer again, and then try logging in again. Also, it's best if you have closed all your windows and other browsers while watching the webinar. We remind you that this is an 8-part webinar. This is the third one, and we invite you to speak with your colleagues about our upcoming topics, which all will fall mostly on the first Monday of every month, with the exception of some holidays. If you have any questions for presenters, and at the end of our webinar discussion today, we are going to invite you to a discussion. And you can record your questions in the chat room here on the left-hand side under attendee chat, and we'll address those as they come up. And then, of course, in order to receive the CE certificate, we'll be mailing a Google form that you will have to fill out a presentation evaluation. And as soon as you fill that out, you'll get a link to the CE certificate. So I want to begin today by first introducing our presenter, who we apologize, but this is a sort of unlikely hero in the regenerative agriculture movement, whose name is Gabe Brown, author of the book Dirt to Soil: One Family's Journey into Regenerative Agriculture. We had invited Gabe to come, and unfortunately, he canceled at the last minute. So we apologize about that. But we had invited him based on a TED Talk that we had seen, that many people have seen, about his journey. So we're going to play that for you today in lieu of his presentation. And then Barbara will be following up with a short presentation afterwards. So Gabe Brown is a farmer from Bismarck, North Dakota. He owns and operates a diversified 5,000-acre farm focused on farming and ranching in nature's image. They produce grass-finished beef, chicken, and pigs. And again, he's a fascinating authority on this type of movement, and we're going to share his TED Talk now.
How fitting it is that this event, which is titled Roots to Wings, is taking place here in North Dakota. For the motto of the state of North Dakota is strength through the soil. And that's what I'm going to visit with you about today. It's about our soil resource. Agriculture has been challenged. How do we feed 9 billion people by the year 2050? With today's current production model, we can do that. It is a model with which one tills the soil. It's a model of monoculture production practices. No matter where you go around this great state, there's fields of wheat, fields of corn, fields of soybeans, and many other crops. It's one of livestock which are now in confinement, whether it be poultry housed in poultry houses or beef cattle in a feedlot, for example. However, these practices have come at a cost. They have caused the loss of biodiversity. Healthy native rangeland has hundreds of different species of plants and animals and insects. Monocultures have but very few. This lack of biodiversity has led to the destruction of our soil resource, and that's what I'm going to visit with you about today. I'll share some proof with you, and this is statistics provided by North Dakota State University. In Walsh County, North Dakota, back in 1960, the topsoil was 34 inches deep. In 2014, that topsoil was only 15 inches deep, a stunning 56% loss. The organic matter level on that same soil had gone from over 8% to less than 3% today. Look at the ramifications of that. The soil on your left was a soil that had not been tilled and had not seen monoculture production practices. That's the same soil 17 years later on the right, after 17 years of the production model of tillage and monocultures. It also destroys the pore spaces in the soil. Those pore spaces are critical for the life in the soil, are critical for water infiltration. Because if we don't have soil aggregates, we cannot infiltrate water. I took this photo in a field less than 10 miles from where you're seated today. That shows a half of an inch of rainfall can no longer be infiltrated into the soil profile. If we can't infiltrate water, then what happens? We resort to things such as tile drainage, and you're seeing this all over the central United States today. What happens when we put tile drainage in and we do not have the soil aggregates to hold our soils in place? That soil ends up in the watershed, and unfortunately along with it goes all the nutrients that may have been applied to those fields. That lack of biodiversity also leads to lower nutrient cycling. If we don't have adequate nutrient cycling, we're going to have to add more and more synthetic fertilizers. Those synthetic fertilizers come at a cost of fossil fuel usage, and they also spur the decline of the soil biology. We need to understand how soil functions. How soil functions is due to that biology, because the plants get their nutrients via the biology. High synthetic fertilizer use also aids in the propagation of weeds. Most weeds love nitrogen. The more synthetic fertilizer we apply, the more weeds we get. If we have increased weed pressure, what do we have to do? Spray herbicides. Now, unfortunately, many of those herbicides are chelates. What is a chelate? A chelate binds metals. So any of the metals such as magnesium, manganese, iron, zinc, copper, then become unavailable to the plant. If the plant cannot uptake these micronutrients, it's more prone to disease. Because plants cannot ward off diseases on their own, we need to spray fungicides. Fungicides then are detrimental to what? Soil biology. Because plants are not healthy enough to ward off pests, we then need to do what? We spray pesticides on the crops which are meant for human consumption. Because we spray pesticides, we have a decline in what? The very predator insects which would take care of the pest which we are spraying. We also have a decline in pollinators. You can hardly pick up a paper or a magazine today without reading about the plight of our pollinators. These pollinators are critical in our crop production. The current production model is all about killing, whether it be weeds, a fungus, a pest, our diversity, or our profit. Take a look at these projections just put out by North Dakota State University. There are 2016 projections for some of the major crops in our state. Every one of them projects a negative return. What impact does that have on the quality of life of those producing that crop? But take it a step further. What impact does it have on our schools? Drive around this state of ours and you're going to see a lot of small towns that have fewer and fewer children attending the schools. What effect does that have on our businesses and then on our communities? What effect does the current production model have on our health? Take a look at this. The nutrient densities of the foods that we produce have declined anywhere from 15 to 65% in the last 50 years. This has had many negative consequences. The United States spends more on health care than any other developed country in the world. Yet look at this. We lead the world in the incidences of ADD, ADHD, cancer, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, and the list goes on and on. This is not acceptable. It cannot continue. But the good news is there's another way, and I'm going to share that with you. It's nature's way. Look at how nature functions. In nature, there's no mechanical tillage. Yet in our production model, we're tilling the soil. In nature, there's always armor on the soil surface, protecting that soil from wind erosion, water erosion, evaporation. Yet in our production model, the fields lie bare. Nature cycles water very efficiently. It's able to infiltrate into the soil profile, then due to the large amount of organic matter, it's held there for such a time it's needed by plants. By destroying our soil resource, we can no longer infiltrate the water and store it for when it's needed. Nature has living plant root networks. There's things growing all times throughout the growing season. Not that way with production agriculture. So often we hear about the production model that we have today as the conventional model. I would argue that nature's way is the conventional model because it's been around for eons of time. Think of it this way. What did this land look like 400 years ago? You had a lot of diversity. There was diversity of plant species, forbs, grasses, legumes, trees, and then also you had a diversity of animals and insects. And all these work together to build a healthy ecosystem. So there's 5 principles that we must follow in order to follow nature's model. They are, number 1, least amount of mechanical disturbance possible. On my own ranch, we have been 100% zero-till since 1994. We have not tilled the soil at all. The second tenet of soil health is armor on the soil surface. We always have the soil covered. That's a picture of one of our fields following seeding. That field is no longer prone to wind erosion or water erosion because we're keeping armor on the surface. Third tenet of soil health is diversity. My son teaches rangeland management at the local community college. He brought his students out to one of our paddocks. They counted over 140 different species of grasses, forbs, and legumes. Why don't we have that in production agriculture today? On our operation, we're trying to mimic it. These are just some of the cash crops that we grow on our operation. We don't just grow one cash crop, we grow many. Along with that, we do not grow cash crops as monocultures. In the upper left there, that's oats with 3 types of clover grown in it. In the upper right is a very diverse cool season broadleaf mix. The lower left, that's corn with hairy vetch grown in it. The lower right, that's sunflowers with over 19 species of covers grown with it. Tremendous amount of diversity feeding soil biology. We also have orchards on our operation. These orchards, besides providing us with the fruit, we're able to have livestock grazing underneath them, thus stacking enterprises. We have 5 acres of vegetable production, but it's not as monocultures. In between each of those corn rows is rows of peas, beans, squash, zucchini, carrots, pumpkins, and a variety of other species. so that we get the benefit of diversity. Fourth tenet of soil health is living root in the ground as long as possible. You don't have to drive very far around this state to see that there are monocultures growing for only a short period of time, and then the land lays idle. These are just some of the cover crop species which we planted on our operation this past year. We actually planted over 70 different species. From the time the snow melts in the spring until the snow stays in early winter, we have a variety of species growing on our land to feed soil health. We're optimizing solar energy collection because how the system works is we take sunlight through photosynthesis. It makes carbon. That carbon is transferred down to the roots where it's leaked out as root exudates. That's what all the biology feeds on. We need that biology in order to get the nutrients to the plant to nourish animals and people. For you see, if we have healthy soil, we're going to have clean air, clean water, healthy plants, healthy animals, and healthy people. We have to focus on feeding biology. Along with this, then, we're able to feed all of the wildlife that's on our operation. We also feed a myriad of different insects. Insects tend to get a bad rap. We like a wide variety of insects, including all the predator insects which take care of the pests. We want to address our problems through biological means, not through chemical means. Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, one of the world's foremost entomologists, told me this: for every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 that are beneficial. Why in production agriculture do we aim at just killing that pest when we should aim at providing habitat for all those beneficials? The reason producers have a pest problem is because of a lack of diversity. We need to think biologically. Fifth tenet of a healthy ecosystem is animal impact. On our operation, we run a herd of 350 beef cows. We also grass finish that beef because we know it's healthier, both for us and for the animals. We have a flock of sheep and raise grass finished lamb. We have pastured pork. We have broilers, which are out on pasture. And we have a flock of 750 laying hens, which are also out on pasture. We also have bees. Those bees, besides pollinating our crop, provide us with honey. Here's what we've done on our operation. When we started in 1993 on the left, we had very shallow topsoils, 1.7% organic matter. We could only infiltrate 1/2 of an inch of rainfall per hour. We then went no-till. We started to diversify the cash crop rotation. We noticed an improvement in soil health. From there, we started to add cover crops, another improvement in soil health. Our organic matter levels rose, our infiltration improved. We then started integrating all of these livestock species on top of it, another marked increase in the health of our soil ecosystem. Now in 2013, we actually have a plot of land which is now over 11% organic matter. The same soils that in 1993 could only infiltrate 1/2 of an inch of rainfall per hour can now infiltrate over 15 inches of rainfall per hour. We've done this without the use of any synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or fungicides. We've done it by following the principles of nature. This has led to a ranch that is profitable every year, regardless of price. And we do this without taking part in any government subsidies of any kind, whether it be a crop insurance, EQIP, CSP, or any other form of government payment. Thus, we are not a burden to society. The stacking of enterprises has allowed us to produce many more nutrient-dense calories of food at a lower cost as compared to the current production model. Yes, we can feed the world, and we can do it in a way that regenerates our resources, thus healing farms, families, and communities. Thank you.
So I'm delighted that we have so many of you that joined us today. This is Barbara Sattler, and I'm going to just facilitate a little bit of a discussion here. I've opened up the attendee chat room so that I can look at all of your comments. And I'm wondering if any of you have any immediate comments, having listened to Gabe's presentation. I know the first time that I heard it, and we're sorry we don't have him here in person. I hope you appreciated how good his talk was. Any of you have any immediate comments on his presentation? And please add that. And I'd also like to share with you a couple of sort of current events, as I might call them. One is that in the front page of the New York Times on Sunday was an article and then an expose within the paper, and it was titled "Across Farms, Illness Sleuths Hit Brick Wall." And it's an article about the pork industry in the United States and how we've begun to see several totally antibiotic resistant salmonella cases that our state epidemiologists and CDC epidemiologists have been trying to investigate. And they've been able to map them back to certain slaughterhouses. But in order for them to really understand what farms they were emanating from and where there were hogs that might have the salmonella, the ranchers and farmers refused to give them access. And there was no overriding law that allowed these state epidemiologists or the CDC to go in and do measurements within these farms and ranches. And it talked about how there was another associated article, and together they talked about how many medically important antibiotics are being used with hogs and dairy cows and chickens and beef. And how at this point in time, as nurses, we really need to think about what our role should be in helping to decrease the number of antibiotic resistant organisms that are coming through our food stocks, essentially. And so I would really encourage you to take a look at this. And one of the other interesting things that was in the article is about half a dozen of our states have what are being now called Gag Laws, which are apply punishments to people who expose conditions on factory farms. And I think that this is deplorable, and we might want to look at our own states and see whether we have these kinds of constrictions on people being able to talk about the conditions in agriculture. I think that what Gabe is doing and many other farmers and ranchers are doing are showing the way for another way to do agriculture that is going to really be taking into account all levels of health. So the health of the plants, the soil, the animals, and then of course our human health. And this is really incredibly important. I know that Megan recently read another article, and I think she'd like to just share this, and it's specific to the issue that Gabe was talking about in terms of soil health. Megan, would you like to join in?
Sure. Sort of similarly to what Barbara was just saying, we're finding more and more, it seems, that the further we've kind of come from agricultural occupations and sort of that hunter-gatherer role, that we are lacking specific soil micronutrients that used to really benefit our health. And specifically, there was an article recently posted in the Journal of Psychopharmacology from May 2019, basically illuminating this idea that they've discovered a bacterium in the soil that produces a fatty acid that's found in healthy soil that interacts with immune cells to inhibit pathways that drive inflammation and increase our resilience to stress. So they're calling this the FAAN effect. And it's basically, of course, researchers are ultimately looking at how to isolate this fatty acid so that they can create a vaccine potentially to a stress vaccine, essentially. But I mean, it shows that the connection between, simple aspects of soil micronutrients that really are beneficial to our health and can be very protective from mental illness, as well as a wide array of inflammatory conditions. So there's a lot more of these articles coming up now, and these connections can truly be made from, how significantly our health has been impacted by current agricultural practices, and how, like Gabe said, and Barbara just mentioned, that there's really a better way that sort of mimics the natural order of farming. So I just wanted to mention that because I felt that it was really kind of pertinent to the discussion.
Yeah, and we are continuing to learn more about the human microbiome. This is Barbara. And as we learn that and concurrently understand about the soil microbiome, it's amazing about the interactions there that we're learning. And this is new science in both directions and really interesting. And I attended a conference a couple of months ago where people were exploring this relationship. And I really appreciated the line that Gabe said today, which is that our current production model is all about killing. And if we kill the microbes, kill the insects, kill the, weeds, and just keep killing things on our farms, we're likely to kill the really necessary and healthy organisms, microorganisms that make up the microbiome of the soil, and ultimately those same organisms that may really have important implications for our health. So a couple of other things. One is the way that this webinar series started was that the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments at our last strategic planning call decided that food and agriculture was another area that we were going to move forward on. And so in addition to the series, which is mostly us giving information to you, we're very interested in understanding what specific interest you have in this area, why you've been on these webinars with us. And we'd like to start later on in the fall to have monthly calls that are just that are calls, not just necessarily webinars, where we can begin to think about how can we organize ourselves as nurses to help provide this information to our colleagues? How can we help to shift purchasing practices in our hospitals, schools, nursing homes, the various institutions where we work? And there is a wonderful organization, Healthcare Without Harm, that will be doing one of our webinars in the future. How can we partner with those folks who have already made great inroads into this area and work with us, work with them together? So we'll be asking you to let us know what is of most important to us by emailing Megan and I, and also letting us know whether you'd like to be involved in our conference calls. They'll be free. There'll be national call-in numbers, so that we can make this a nursing conversation and not just an educational action, but also then putting us into action. So we'll continue to have the webinar series, and Megan will talk about that at the very end. But I'm also going to be just doing a brief presentation now that is going to be a little bit of review of some of the things, as well as a little preview of some of the things on the future webinars and that we're going to be talking about. So we are going to be talking in more detail about antibiotic use in animals. We know as nurses that antibiotics are incredibly important to the many infections that we take care of, and that 18,000 people die annually. The National Academy of Sciences estimated that the cost is as much as $4 billion to take care of antibiotic-resistant infections. And we also know that it's a really scary operation when we as nurses in hospitals are having to take care of a patient who has a totally antibiotic resistant infection. So as important as it is to our public and to our individual patients, this is really important to us also, because the very last thing that we want to be doing is in some way or another bring antibiotic resistant pathogens back home with us to the ones that we love. So one of the things that we discovered with Dr. Ellen Silbergeld's work, and she worked with chicken catchers who literally catch the chickens in the evenings, is that these chicken catchers were winding up, and these chickens were given antibiotics. These chicken catchers were developing antibiotic-resistant organisms in their gut, and that's because they were able to get them to give stool samples and then put them in petri dishes and saw what kinds of antibiotic-resistant organisms might come from that. Now, these are otherwise totally healthy, mostly men, and on the East Coast, they're mostly African American men who are the chicken catchers. And what we know is that many of them are not actually winding up with antibiotic resistant infections, but they are bringing those home with them. And so if they have newborns in the house, or they have anybody who has any kind of immunodeficiency or is on immunosuppressant medications, this is putting them in harm's way. So one of the things that we need to be doing is, of course, just removing these the use of non-therapeutic antibiotics in all of our animal production. We also know another group of workers that are exposed are the people who are in the slaughterhouses and in the processing plants. And when you start adding all of these people up and look at where they are in our communities, they're often in our low-income communities and communities that are, for many reasons, already at higher risk of disease. So really important that we consider these issues, and that we as nurses call for the wholesale elimination of non-therapeutic antibiotics in our when we're raising animal meats. And this will help us with sort of taking care of all of these issues at once. In some, we do have now a new federal law that says that medically important antibiotics meaning medically important to humans, those antibiotics should not be used, and that they need a veterinarian's prescription, because up until now, you can go to a feed store and get the antibiotics already in animal feed. So there already are some steps that are being made. But as was clear from the New York Times article that came out yesterday, just yesterday, many of the hog farmers are still using antibiotics and still refusing to talk about their use, where they're using them, how much. The slide I'm showing you right now came from San Francisco, so a specific state ordinance that was passed that basically said that any retailers that are selling meat products where medically important antibiotics are used have to tell the customer this. So this is for all the grocery stores that have at least one outlet. So they're not applying this burden on the small little mom and pop corner stores, but they are saying that any major grocery store who is operating in San Francisco has to provide this information. And so you can see how applying different pressures, both at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, can begin to make a difference. So when it comes to hogs, one of the things that we know is that they are one of the meat animals that is often raised in concentrated animal feed organizations. These things, the acronym is CAFOs. They don't even call them farms anymore. Now, what Gabe Brown was talking about earlier in his talk is a situation where they do have the animals out and about in the fields where they're not caged and confined. But most hogs that are raised in the United States are confined. And so because of these situations, they often are applying these non-therapeutic levels of antibiotics. The other thing, and the main reason that they give them, is because it shifts their metabolism and it increases their weight gain. But this is an instance where our purchasing power as a healthcare sector can make a difference by making requests that both our hogs, as well as any beef and veal that we buy, not receive unnecessary and non-therapeutic antibiotics. Most of our beef in this country, this is a historic photograph that was taken of the Chicago stockyards at the same time that a famous novel was written about the stockyards that was entitled The Jungle by Sinclair Lewis. And this was in the 1930s, I believe, when they really had absolutely no regulations. There was no Department of Agriculture oversight of our stockyards. And through this novel, where he actually integrated into the novel the conditions in the stockyards, there was a huge human outcry for better agricultural oversight. And certainly we've made some progress there. But the truth of the matter is that we still finish off what's called finishing off most of the beef cows and beef cattle in this country by sending them to feedlots where they're often in very concentrated situations, and they're fed there before they're sent to the slaughterhouse. And we know that in these situations with these feedlots, that they can create some environmental and human health situations. I'll talk about that in a second. We also know that in terms of beef, that according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, that about a fifth of the world's greenhouse gases is coming from global meat and dairy production. And that this is, if we don't change and shift to more plant-based diets and less beef and dairy-based diets, we're going to see almost a doubling of that consumption in the next 50 years. We know also that livestock uses 30% of the Earth's ice-free land, and that's both for grazing as well as for the production of corn and other products that are then eaten by the livestock. And so this combination of things is using a lot of the arable land that if we shift to plant-based products on those lands, we can keep increasing our food production without very much of a taxation on the land. One way that we can promote this is to think about our own, what we eat, our own diets, and shift ourselves to having either a meatless Monday or Thursday or Tuesday or whenever, decreasing the number of days a week that we rely on meat for our proteins. But we can also be really looking at our institutions and seeing how we can encourage them. There are hospitals around the country. I was in Maryland for a long time, and I'm in California now, and both in Maryland and in California, we have hospitals and health systems that now have adopted Meatless Monday as a policy. So I'm going to reiterate something that I covered on the very first webinar that we had. But when we talk about USDA certified, and in this instance, I'm looking at meat and dairy, what exactly does that mean? And so for those of you who are not familiar with that, if we're talking about proteins, and I'll start with that, it means that the meats or poultry or dairy have not come from, cannot come from a non-cloned animal, and that no antibiotics are used. So if you buy a USDA certified meat product or dairy or eggs, it's that animal will be guaranteed to not have been given a non-therapeutic antibiotics. Just want to be clear. Obviously, if an animal is sick and can be treated by an antibiotic, that animal is then culled from the herd or the flock and treated. But their products, if they're eggs or dairy, et cetera, will not then be part of the product that that farmer will use. In addition to antibiotics, and that's what ABX stands for, they also cannot use growth hormones. If we're talking about produce, just to reiterate what I've talked about in the past, the produce cannot, the farmer cannot have used any toxic pesticides, use sewage sludge, any petroleum-based synthetic fertilizers. They can't use GMO seeds or any other kind of bioengineered seeds or plants, and they can't use ionizing radiation as part of their processes. So I wanted to share with you one specific article that was written many years ago now by Elizabeth Gillette. And she went down to Mexico, where she was looking at two different populations of Yaqui native children, native to Mexico. And she was asked to do a battery of tests with these kids. And there were kids that were in a highly agricultural valley. And then there were kids that were way up on the hillside. And the valley was where they used lots of pesticides, and they obviously grew fruits and vegetables. The hillside terrain didn't allow them to do that. And so one of the things that Elizabeth Gillette noted when she was there was that the kids looked happy and healthy. No evidence of obvious disease. So she started to do a battery of tests with them. And one of the things she did was she played catch with the kids. And she discovered that those kids in the valley did not do as well at catching the ball as would be age appropriate for them. Whereas the kids in the hillside were able to catch the ball appropriately. She then put down a board on the ground, and she asked the kids to take a few steps forward and then turn around. And the kids who were up in the hillside, where they didn't have agriculture, the kids up there were able to walk to the end and in an age-appropriate way turn around. When she had the kids in the valley do this, the highly agricultural valley, the kids were able to walk to the end, but then many of them could not call upon the coordination to turn around and walk back. So one of the other things that she had a bunch of different things that she had them do, a whole battery of tests. And then she wrote this up, and it was accepted for publication in Environmental Health Perspectives, which is the official journal of the National Institutes of Health for Environmental Health. So it's the National Institutes of Environmental Health Science. And so one of the last things that she asked the kids to do was draw pictures and of humans. And so these were the pictures of the kids that were up in the foothills. And you'll see how the age of the kids and also what these pictures looked like. And these were the pictures, some of the pictures that were drawn by the kids that were in the valley. And one of the things that I think it's really important to discern here is that this was a one-time study. Much more needs to be evaluated here. But there were clear issues that arose. And because these particular graphics were so disturbing, and still are very disturbing, and were presented to Congress in a hearing, several different advances were made on pesticide protection, but not clearly enough for us to be preventing the kinds of damage that it appears to have affected these children. And so we have much work to do in terms of keeping pesticides from being regularly used on our crops. One of the things that people often say, nurses in particular, is, well, I work with a lot of people who are low income and they can't afford organic foods. And I totally appreciate that. And I think that we have to protect our most vulnerable populations. And so some of the things that we can suggest to them, one is using farmers markets, if that's at all possible, so that they would know the farmers that they were buying from. The other is using this shopper's guide that was created by Environmental Working Group. And if you just Google Dirty Dozen Shopper's Guide, you'll find this information. And what Environmental Working Group did was they looked at a whole variety of fruits and vegetables, but those that are commonly bought by you and I and American citizens everywhere in the country. And they looked at which ones had the worst pesticide residues and which one did not. And so what they suggested is that of the Dirty Dozen, these are fruits and vegetables that, when they're grown conventionally, have a lot of pesticide residues that are found on them. And so when possible, you should buy those organically, and or you should not eat them if the only place you can get them is at a conventional, as at a store and grown conventionally, or not eat them as often. Whereas the Clean 15, these are fruits and vegetables that aren't necessarily grown or raised with a lot of pesticides, so they have less pesticide residues. The other thing that I would suggest is that all of you go to the website What's on My Food, not what's in my food, what's on my food, and you can actually evaluate the fruits and vegetables that you eat and see what kinds of pesticide residues have been found by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The other thing for us to think about from another sort of global perspective is how many miles our food travels, and therefore why it's important whenever possible to be buying local produce. And the average food travels from farm to plate about 1,500 miles. And I've actually heard that it's even more than that. And so when we think about that, when we think about especially processed foods as opposed to fresh produce, that they use an enormous amount of energy. They also use gas and oil and diesel to be transported and so forth. So when we're looking at food purchasing, whether it's our personal purchasing or the purchasing of our institutions, let's think about how we can, whenever possible, buy locally. Another thing I'd like to just share with you, this menu of options was created with Healthcare Without Harm and the Maryland Hospitals for a Healthy Environment, which I directed years ago. And what we tried to do was help people understand that there are lots of different things that we can do, especially with our healthcare institutions, that it's not just one thing that we have to, hone in on. But if you look at this list, we tried to divide it into, sort of the main themes. And so from a healthier foods perspective, buying local, organic, recombinant bovine growth hormone-free dairy, meats and other proteins that are raised without antibiotics, grass-fed foods, using fair trade coffee, buying sustainably caught seafood, arsenic-free poultry, pastured eggs so that they're not caged chickens, and GMO-free foods. All of these really are going to help with helping us be healthier people, healthier farm workers, healthier farmers. And then you can see the list that was created in terms of increasing access. So really, many hospitals now actually support farmers markets, either on their own properties or nearby. Some of them have farm stands. A couple of hospitals that I know of have a produce section in their cafeterias, so people can actually buy foods there in their hospitals. Also, supporting communities supported agriculture is another way of increasing access. And you can see some of the other things here. And then there are a variety of things once you engage your hospitals in really thinking about how they can provide healthier foods, is how can you also apply sustainable practices to a lot of the things we do around food and agriculture in our hospitals. And so this list, this presentation will be archived, and this list will be available for you to review for any of you who have interest in doing more work around this issue. So when we begin to think about localizing our food economies, we can really think about how, whether we live in a small rural community or an urban area that has access to farm country a little ways away, we can think about how we can aggregate our demands so that we're making our demands for foods that are seasonally grown, that are as local as possible, that we're creating opportunities to increase access to healthy foods for our patients and the communities we serve, using our community benefits programs for that. That's a really good use of every nonprofit hospital has to have a community benefits program. So getting in touch with yours, really important way that you can increase that. Some hospitals have supported community gardens. There are opportunities for people to volunteer there, and occasionally actually created paid jobs there. So there are a variety of ways that we can really make changes around food and agriculture and healthcare that are going to help us to make the shifts that we need to. Some of them will be things that we'll do ourselves and we'll encourage our immediate colleagues to do. Some of them will be developing food policies within our hospitals and health systems through purchasing and other ways. And some of them will be engagement in local, state, and federal policies that are either statutory or regulatory that are going to help shift how we're labeling, how we're applying toxic chemicals to our farm fields and in agricultural production. I like this little McDonald's thing now serving 100% locally grown ingredients, but no, unfortunately, just kidding. And so many of our hospitals have got some fast food little chains that we allow in there. That's another thing that we can clearly make changes about. So I hope that this smorgasbord of additional information is of interest and helpful to you. We are going to have a whole program on antibiotics in the future. We're going to have a whole program on healthcare without harm and the ways in which they've shifted purchasing in hospitals and how you can be involved in them. We have a number of really good programs that are coming up. And with that, I'm just wondering if any of you have comments or additional resources you'd like to share with folks, or if you just like the program today or any of the other webinars, we'd love to hear from you. And you can just write a little bit in the attendee chat, and you'll see that. You can click on that, and then we can read it. And I'm wondering also, Megan, if you have anything you'd like to add, because I covered a lot in a little time.
Yes, I'll just sort of give everybody an update for our future webinar, which is scheduled actually for September 9th. The topic is going to be agriculture and climate change, and we're bringing in an expert in that field, Renata Berlinger from the California Climate and Agricultural Network. And that focus will be more on, you know, the climate effects of our current agricultural system. And again, please feel free to go to the Annie website. The links for each of the previous webinars have been posted, I've been told. And if you have any problem with that, please do email me. And I will get you that link one way or the other. And you can feel free to share that with colleagues as well, who may have not registered for the previous webinars, but they can also go through the program and do a post-test for their own CE credit as well. So we're just looking, doesn't seem like anybody has any questions or comments here. So we might just close a little early today. Certainly we look forward to having you join us in our next webinar. Like I said, it's on the 9th of September because the first Monday of the month falls on Labor Day weekend. So we've pushed that off to the following week. But generally, going forward, you can find us here on the first Monday of every month. And we will also post some of these resources that we just discussed, specifically the journal article I mentioned and the New York Times article that Barbara highlighted for you to review. And I'll send that in a follow-up email after we're done.
Yeah, and we're going to be creating a dedicated webpage on the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments on food and agriculture. So we'd love if you find things that you find are important, interesting, and you want to share them with nurses, if you send them to Megan or I, and you have our email addresses now in the chat box, please send that, because we'll distribute that and get that onto our website so other nurses can see it. Also, I did get a couple of private comments to me saying that there was appreciation of how to think about low-income populations and ways to increase their access to healthy foods. And of course, that's always really important to nurses, how we care for our most vulnerable populations. Also, if you are interested in being part of the conversations, and I saw another response that I got of somebody who's interested in being part of the conversations as well, email me and or Megan, and we'll make sure that we tell you the times that those conversations are going to happen. And with that, I think we're going to wrap today. And thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and appreciate that you're interested in this important health issue. Thanks.